to Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering, your key to unlocking success in the digital evolution of products and manufacturing. In this episode, Jonathan Scott and I have Dr. Patrick Hillberg returning for his fourth time on the podcast to share his insights and some use cases around digital twins and their role in digital engineering. From Apollo 13 to harbor cranes and Boeing 737 incidents, we explore real-world applications, the power of digital threads, and how these technologies boost safety and efficiency. Let's dive in. Welcome back, everybody, to Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering, the podcast about all things digital related to products, and from engineering to manufacturing, service, and beyond. I'm one of your hosts and colleagues. I'm Julianne Grant, and today I'm joined by my co-host and colleague, Jonathan Scott.
Hello, everybody.
And Jonathan, we're back at it today.
We are.
Guess what we're talking about?
My favorite topic.
Yes, we're talking about digital twins. We're going to continue our series about the digital twin. We've been talking about this for several episodes now, talking about, from the beginning of terminology to now the different elements around the digital twin, what's important, what's not. And today we're going to dig a little bit deeper because a lot of times when we're talking about digital twin, we talk a lot about the use cases. What is the purpose of the digital twin and why are we doing this anyway? And so we brought back a special guest today to help us dig into this topic because we know he's got a passion for it. And he helps us think very creatively as he hears a lot of things throughout his from his background and his experience, but as well as from some of his current works that he does now. So I'd like to welcome back Dr. Patrick Hillberg.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. This is my fourth, and by the way, in the SNL paradigm, you guys owe me a jacket on my fifth. Right?
I think you're right.
We might have a mug for you.
Oh, okay.
I love it though. We should have a 5-timers club. That'd be fantastic.
We'll need a jacket or something. Yeah. But for those of you who don't know Patrick, he brings a great deal of experience, has decades of experience in designing, developing, and leading teams in PLM, digitalization, advanced manufacturing. He's a speaker. He's written books. He's a professor at Oakland University and teaches on PLM. And he even told us today that his class is the biggest one he's had in a few years. So that's a really good sign for digital engineering. But he focuses on topics like things like system thinking, organizational dysfunction, sustainability, and complexity. So really happy to have you back, Patrick.
Oh, I'm happy to be back. Thank you very much. So, and I enjoy this series that you're doing on digital twins. In fact, the episodes you posted so far, I've listened to a couple of times to get deeper into this and into what your thinking is and such like. So, and I cover digital twins in my own course. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And I have a colleague so I teach at Oakland University, and Oakland is north of Detroit. So, in fact, back when I had a classroom, I could look out my window and I could see the Chrysler World headquarters through the windows, right? So, but I have a colleague there who teaches digital twins in manufacturing, which is a fairly new course. So you can see digital twins. So I've been teaching it for a while. Ali Malik has started teaching it in the last couple of years. So we've got a lot going on with digital twins at Oakland University. I'll do a shameless plug for my university.
Hey, right? No worries. Okay. So let's jump in, Pat. Our topic today, I think what we want to sort of focus on or center on is how people use digital twins and what they're building them for, right? I don't think that topic needs a lot of framing. I think our audience will know where we're coming from. But I know you brought some examples, and I want to start with a reminder about twins, right? Sort of the basic purpose. How did they come about? What is a twin? What does it mean? That kind of thing. And I know there's an example from popular culture, which I think would be pretty accessible to our audience that's worth digging into. So what does, in the movie Apollo 13, what does I'll call it an analog twin, right, that Gary Sinise uses on the ground to help solve a problem that's happening in space? What does that tell us about digital twins today? Maybe take us through more of the story for those who haven't heard it and sort of your perspective on how that fits.
Sure. And as a matter of fact, I just went back to watch that on YouTube this morning because I knew we would be talking about that. So this 2-minute clip is on YouTube. You can find it. And in it, so the issue is the crew on Apollo 13 have moved off into the LEM, I think, and then they shut down power in the landing capsule. All of these have names. I forgot what the names are.
Right.
Sure. So they moved out of the landing capsule. They shut down power in the landing capsule. They used up basically all the power in the LEM to keep themselves alive for the, 36 hours or so that they were coming back before they were going to splash land in the ocean. And the concern was when they bring power back into the capsule, would they spike too much power? Would there be a spike in amperage? So as in the capsule, which was up in space, it would be the Kevin Bacon character who needs to turn on switches in order to power things up. But in that 36 hours prior to that, down in Houston, Gary Sinise is in a replica of that capsule as he's turning things on, and there's a group of young engineers in their shirt and ties, back when engineers wore shirt and ties, watching how many amps are being drawn as you turn the things on, and they come up with the realization that they can pull power from the LEM, and it's a very innovative scene. It's very dramatic and all that sort of thing. But the point of the scene from a twin standpoint is that we had, in that case, the concept of a CAD-based twin or software or virtual model, that sort of. I mean, they had a true
digital twin, right? That wasn't what they were dealing with, but
yeah, but they had a physical twin,
right?
I mean, they had a physical twin. They had this physical thing that could emulate what was going on up in the capsule, and because of that, then Gary Sinise saves the day for Kevin Bacon and all the rest, because they could work all that stuff out. They could go over amperage and not have a catastrophe, and then they could come back and use that information in order to solve the real problem.
And I think that's, I'm going to just stop us there. That's sort of one of the drivers as people think about use cases. I mean, if we boil it down, what did they do? They had a low-risk environment to try things out. They had something that was a close simulation, right? And so some people listening to us talk about this could fairly criticize, yeah, fellas, that's simulation. That's what that is, right? And okay, fair. But the point was, they created a twin. On purpose, they created a twin because they weren't sure what they might need to face, and they used it for training, and they used it for all kinds of things. But then the use case, and that's why we're talking about it today, the use case was, hey, wait, we can use it for something else. We can use it to troubleshoot this scenario, to fix this emergent problem we weren't aware of, and it wasn't done digitally. But that's the aha moment, I think, why you were bringing this example, right?
Right, exactly. And I'll tell you, so I started teaching. I designed my class in 2012 based on a book that was written in 2011. And that book is Virtually Perfect by Dr. Michael Greaves. And I know Mike, and he used to teach in my class, and now he teaches in my friend Ali's class. And in the book, so 2011, Mike refers to this thing called information mirror model. And then there's a footnote where he says, oh, but you know what? My friend John Vickers calls it a digital twin. So here we are in 2011, no later than 2011. And you already have this phrase, digital twin. But to be honest, at this point in time, it was a pretty abstract topic. And Mike's a fine author, but it was a little bit dry. And I'm doing shadow puppets on the wall, trying to express these ideas to my students. So at some point I realized, oh, wait a second, here we are in this movie, Apollo 13, and it gives a good representative example of, hey, you remember that movie with Gary Sinise, whatever. And it starts to get the idea across. Something else I really like to bring semi-practical examples into class. Yeah, Madden football. We have a simulation of a real football game, and there's always that point in the football game, many points in the football game, where they're trying to decide whether the person was in bounds or out of bounds when the ball was caught, and all that sort of thing. And there's all those logos on the players' jerseys, and I really think you could create a digital twin of the players on the field on a football game to figure out where that ball was, where was his left foot when that ball was caught, right? There's actually all the information there. You could take that information you're getting on the cameras and bring it into Madden football and say, okay, Madden, you tell us where it was. So
right, if we could do it with special effects in movies, right? Why couldn't we do it with football? Yeah.
Oh, and I'm going to wander off topic, but I promise I'll be brief. But if you watch The Mandalorian on Disney, and then if you watch some of the behind the scenes stuff that talk about it, they have this thing called previs, where they do simulation models of where all the actors will be in relation to what's on the set, and then the eventual special effects that they need to have. So they're creating a virtual model of a movie, which is in it of itself a virtual model, right? So,
right. Not to get meta about being
just
meta.
Meta exploded this morning, but yeah.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Let's come back to the example we gave, right? The analog twin,
right?
And talk about sort of where does that go? Like you were saying in a movie or in a sports event or whatever, we could sort of predict that simulation piece, right? I want to try something out. I know there's another example you've brought up about, how you could be testing things ahead of time, right? The Harbor case study.
Yes, right. Actually, this one, I'm going to do two things. So the idea is a front-running simulation, and really the Apollo 13 example is a front-running simulation. Gary Sinise was down on the ground simulating what Kevin Bacon needs to do. I wish I remembered the astronaut's name, sorry.
Right.
Gary Sinise is on the ground doing a simulation during that 36 hours ahead of Kevin Bacon needing to do the thing in real life. So in that case, he's doing a simulation forward in time. I worked with a student, just a terrific MBA student, Masame Salimi, and she was doing her MBA thesis on digital twins during COVID in 2001. And she was looking at digital twins of harbor cranes. So these are the cranes that operate in harbors and unloading things. And the example that she found was a barge, demolition barge in Texas that had performed a lift that was way too heavy for that barge. And the crane ended up collapsing. And fortunately, it wasn't nearly as catastrophic as some other things. However, fortunately, nobody died, but that was truly, that was fortunate. Somebody could have been underneath the crane boom, and there were some injuries involved in it. There was millions of dollars of damage. So the idea that Masame expressed in this in her thesis was that we could have a front-running simulation of it was called the Atlantic Giant 2 that was making a major lift. We could have a front-running simulation on the crane that was doing the lift to help the people on board recognize that they were creating their own problems. And if you look at the overall situation, at this point, they've been trying this lift for about 12 hours. It was a hot, sweaty day in Brownsville, Texas. The CEO of the crane company had been brought out. And earlier they'd made a decision that we're not going to lift any higher than, I think it was like 500 million tons. And he said, okay, we're going to go up to 700 million tons and see if it works. Otherwise, we're going to, and at 700 million tons, the whole thing collapsed. And one of the things that there were tugboats nearby, one of the things the tugboat said is, wait a second, you're pulling the stern out of the water as you're trying to pull this thing up. My point is, a front-running simulation could have guided the people on board in terms of the lift that they were actually making. So the Apollo 13 case is, okay, let's simulate this whole thing in advance. The front-running simulation on the Atlantic Giant was, let's simulate this just a few seconds in advance,
right,
so that we can recognize and we can throw up warning flags or potentially stop, at that
prevent
point,
disaster. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So realistically, the people on board the Atlantic Giant did not realize that the stern was coming out of the water. So a front-running simulation in this case would really, it's a real-time running simulation that could provide situational awareness,
right,
of the system.
So that those make perfect sense, right? And those are great use cases that I think we should all have in mind. And in our organizations, how does that apply? Let's take a step further, though, right? Because I think part of what we want to get into today is, well, that's one kind of digital twin, and maybe even those two examples, they're disconnected, right? In the Gary Sinise case, Apollo 13 case, it's a physical and a physical. In the front-running simulation, it's a digital and a physical, but there's no feedback between them. It's just you're checking this to see if that's going to happen. So let's take a step further. Let me flip that around, Patrick. We were just talking about the one direction of the shadow data that comes back, right? What about the other direction? Do you have an example there of full digital twin where we're using the virtual to control the physical?
Yeah, actually. So I have a kind of embarrassing example of that that occurred to me this week.
These are the best stories.
Right, exactly. So I do a fair amount of biking, and in this case, I drove my bike to the start of the ride. I normally don't, but this time I did, and get my bike all set up. And there's a rider friend who's in the car parked next to me, and I took off before he did. And after we met up at the start of the ride, and he said, "Oh, Pat, you left your door open on your car." It's like, oh my God. And I'm about to go on this ride that's going to go for 3-4 hours. So for 3-4 hours, my car would have been, the door would have been completely open, and he very nicely closed it. But he said, but I didn't lock it because I didn't know where your keys were. I didn't want to lock your keys in your car. He says, oh my God. Oh, Eric, thank you so much for doing this. And then I pulled out my phone and I pulled up my OnStar app and I said, okay, lock the doors, please. And it locked the doors very finally for me. So
there you go. Right.
I mean,
that's the digital twin. We've got a model on our phone and an app of our car, and now we're controlling it. The data is going back the other way.
Right. It's a sparse model. I mean, it only gives me 6 or 7 pieces of information, but that was a really important piece of information.
It's a critical piece at the point. Yeah.
No, that's great. So I think that helps us understand some of these pieces about directionality. Maybe let's just get it to the bigger cases.
So, actually, at the same time that Masame was doing her thesis, there was a there's a condominium in Florida which collapsed suddenly, just in the middle of the night. Suddenly, this whole building collapsed, and there's a number of potential reasons for it. But there were probably clues. If you could have put strain gauges in that building, there were probably clues in the strain gauges that would help you realize that the building is about to collapse, and probably those strain gauges could potentially have given that information years in advance. The condominium board was really delaying the idea of when do we do these necessary repairs, which will cost millions of dollars. So, but if you'd had, so the concept here is potentially you've got a 3D model of a virtual. I'm sorry, you've got a virtual model of a physical building, but we don't really know what, and the building is 40 years old. We don't really know what's happening in the building. However, we could apply strain gauges to the building, and we could tie those strain gauges to a finite element an FEA model, finite element analysis. We could tie the strain gauges to an FEA model of that building, and by doing so, we can recognize that the building is moving in ways that the FEA model says
or dangerous, or shouldn't be moving, or
right, exactly. And at a very minimum, you could have run the fire alarms 5 minutes ahead. And because, I mean, the collapse happened at 1 a.m, right? So you could have run the fire alarm. I mean, I think it's very reasonable to say we could, with that information, we could run the fire alarms 5 minutes in advance and at least get people out of the building, but before the building collapses. And I think once you get to that point, it's not that hard to move forward and say, oh, I think we could have figured this out months or years in advance. And then done the work that requires it. So anyway, so that was theoretical. But there's some stuff that I teach in my class about bridges. As a matter of fact, a great source I use in my class is the YouTube channel called Practical Engineering.
Right.
And he covers this in 2 or 3 places where, as a matter of fact, there was a bridge in, I've forgotten, Missouri, I think. I think it was Kansas City, Missouri. And a visual inspection of that bridge did not recognize a huge crack that was in that bridge. And it was probably 18 months later, they were coming back doing some other repair. And at this point, they did see the crack at that point, and they closed the bridge within, as soon as they could get the cops there, right? As soon as they could get the cops to close the bridge, they closed the bridge. And the bridge was down for a couple of years, I think. So I forget which one. It was one of the interstate highways. So once again, if you have monitoring tools on a bridge, and in the U.S., our bridges have become probably 70, 75 years old, and we should really be monitoring these. There was a bridge near Pittsburgh that collapsed during a morning rush hour, right?
One in Minneapolis a couple of years ago too, right? I mean, it's happened, right? And that's, I think your point is that we could use that limited digital twin to combine with that idea of the front-running simulation. So we could get some data coming back, even if it's sparse, that would give us information that could be helpful.
Right. So if you could tie that, if you could tie that tied a strain gauge to an FEA model, which is based on the original 3D geometry, there's real social value in that, right? We can recognize in advance that the bridge either needs to be closed or the bridge needs to be repaired. As a matter of fact, in this case, there was a drone that just flat out missed the crack. The person monitoring the drone just visually missed the fact that the crack was right in front of them. So, but I think real-time monitoring rather than the occasional drone that goes up every 18 months, you could really start seeing things.
So speaking of drones, I'm gonna take this because I think this is an example, and maybe that's not the one we want to use, but I want to flip that question I had a minute ago the other direction. Okay, so how about digital surrogates, right? Where our digital model, our virtual instance, is the thing that we are using to control the physical. And I bring up drones because I think of that as an example of that. But what do we see there? What are some use cases you've seen?
So, as I mentioned, I started teaching out of this textbook in 2011, and the author of the textbook begins to posit, in fact, they literally use the term digital twin at one point in this 2011 textbook. And he talks about 6 characteristics of product lifecycle management. But to tell you the truth, 15 years later, now you realize that these are even better characteristics of digital twins and digital threads than they are of PLM. So the first characteristic is correspondence. For any physical object, we want a virtual instance which reflects that object. So any information we might get from the physical thing, we can find in its virtual instance. And in order to do that, in order to accomplish that thread over time in order to accomplish correspondence over time, we need a thread. So we need a thread which communicates back to us what is actually going on with the project or the product. The next characteristic is cohesion. The virtual objects must obey things like the laws of gravity and the laws of physics and all that sort of stuff. So, and we have this in our simulation models. And the Madden football example earlier, you can have wind in that model, right? So, we need traceability, and I know you guys are all over traceability, right? Is we need to capture how the product changed from design into manufacturing, and then how does it change over time? If we update the physical product through some sort of a service action after it leaves the factory, we need traceability as the fact that we actually did that. And in fact, that one overlaps another topic, which is called reflectivity, changes that occur to the product after it has left control of the producer.
Right.
And actually, the example I use on this is a ship that was hit by a missile in the early 2000s and was then rebuilt. So not only you need the as attacked model, right? It's not just the as built and the as defined and all that sort of thing. You need the what is the state of the ship after. What was the state of the car after the crash?
Right.
Et cetera. We need a single source of truth, and I'm sure you guys are all over the place on that. And then we need all the information to be easily and securely available. So we need to be able to we need the information at our fingertips, but we need to present that information only to the people who are appropriate for having that information. So if you go back and go through these things, so these 6 characteristics that Greaves laid out in 2011, 2 of the characteristics tie very directly to a digital twin, which is correspondence. Any information we get from the physical, we should also be able to find in the virtual.
Right.
And cohesion, anything that has occurred to the physical is reflected back into the virtual. But the foundation of all this are the other 4, which is the digital thread. And this really gets to in the digital thread becomes the real technological thing. Is, how do we implement it? If our goal is to have a virtual model of anything that exists in the real space, what is that technology that gets us there? And that's traceability and reflectivity and singularity or single source of truth and making the information available. So
the thread is really the feeder of data into a twin.
Yeah.
In some level.
In my view now, after 15 years of this, the thread to me is really the key critical thing. And the twin is an important thing that comes out of the thread.
Right.
Although it's not the only thing that comes out of the thread. And I'm currently researching a paper on what's the origin of our product information methods, and are we still using these same product information methods? And maybe we should be using new product information methods. And I'm positing that the new information method is we need to focus on building a thread first, and then we can build the rest of our product information methods off of the thread. And I won't jump into this today, but that starts to solve the multi-bomb debate as to which bomb is the more appropriate bomb. If we think about a thread that always provides us with virtual information about the physical thing, then the different views of the bomb simply become views on that thread. So
absolutely, I am 100% on board with that. Right? I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense, and we have talked about that in the past. That the thread is the basis; it's the foundation for whatever twins you might build. Right? And as you think about, oh, I need a twin for this or a twin for that, because a lot of times that's what people are thinking, these use cases. You need to have that underlying set of data that's connected in a way that enables that. And you might not have it when you have a use case in mind for a certain twin, but then you can go build it, and that's why your thread grows over time.
Sure, right, exactly. And if you begin with a concept of, you begin with a concept of, I need information before I need a product. And if you begin with the concept that the information is actually, to some extent, more important than the product, they have to work together. But every bit is important of the product. You begin by designing and developing your digital thread, and then come back and start building the product on top of that. So
can you give us a use case, like on to help really fully illustrate what you're talking about?
Yeah. So one would be. So the Boeing 737 door plug, it's two big incidents with the Boeing 737. In the door plug incident, the fuselage was manufactured in Wichita, and then it was mismanufactured. The door plug was mismanufactured. There was something wrong with it. So when the fuselage moved to Renton, they disassembled the door plug and then reassembled the door plug. And when they reassembled the door plug, they forgot or whatever, but they did not put in 4 bolts that needed to be put in. Now, actually, my background in aerospace goes back to the kind of mid-2000s, and the FAA has requirements that the way it was described to us is, if you assemble the wing and a forklift runs into the wing in the course of doing whatever, and you have to take a panel off and put a panel back on again, you need to record all that information. So
right.
in the mid-2000s, it was already in the cultural zeitgeist that anything like this happens, you need to record the information. And in 2009, I was part of a team at the 787 facility that was implementing this. So it was in fact, what I was doing at that point was bomb exports from PLM to the MES system. So
right.
and part of the export included what things needed sign off, what were the work, and part of the export was the work instructions, and associated with the work instructions were the sign-offs.
The traceability requirements, right? I mean, right. To bring up your point earlier, right? And it's not that traceability wasn't done in an analog way before. It was, and it could be. But to your point, you were enabling that digital traceability through that project.
Another story I heard when working on this is, and this is when this is the mid-2000s when we were setting this stuff up, that the number, let's see, for every hour of manufacturing on a 747, there was 4 hours of planning and 4 hours of checkoff. And the weight of the paper was more than the weight of the plane. So, like,
that makes sense.
So in any event,
thank goodness we're going digital, right?
Yeah.
In 2024, when this door plug happens, the head of the National Transportation Safety Board goes to Congress and complains that she could not get the sign-off information about what actually occurred in Renton. When you took the door off and you put the door back on again, there should be instructions on how to do it. There should be a person who signed off on the fact that it was done properly. So the instructions would have said, reinsert these 4 bolts, and there would have been a person who signed off on it. And so 15 years later, that information is not available to the FAA when the FAA needs it. So first, where I go with this is a diffusion of information issue. So we have a diffusion of innovation issue. We have these issues where it just takes a long time for innovation to diffuse itself across all the people who might make use of it. And in this particular case, it's like, okay, I personally know that this technology was implemented in North Charleston in 2009, all in the same company. Why did it not make its way across to the Pacific in Renton in 15 years later in 2024? I think the misassembly happened in 22 or 23, but
right.
So in any event, so there's if you get to the digital twin of a true digital twin of that aircraft, would have recognized that those 4 bolts were not present. The digital thread, which would have recognized that those 4 bolts were not present, would include this information that should have been recorded in the MES system. Also in that MES system should have been work instructions and sign-off criteria to say,
put the 4 bolts in, check to make sure they're there, all those things. Yeah.
Right. Put the bolts in, idiot, right? So, and actually, as a matter of fact, there were some issues on that aircraft before the plug actually blew off where it was having trouble maintaining, the cabin was having trouble maintaining pressurization. I think it flew 2 or 3 times before the plug actually blew off.
I wonder why.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. So a true digital twin supported by a completely accurate digital thread could prevent that sort of incident. And then I'll jump on a little bit. I'm on the 737 MAX. So, and of course, what everybody talks about the 737 MAX is the Lion Air crash in 2017, or is it 1819? I think it's 1819. So the Lion Air crash, and then there's the Ethiopian Air crash. And we spent a lot of time in my class discussing this. So there was a design decision made at Boeing. There was a service action that occurred in Florida. There was another service action 1 year later that occurred in Malaysia. There were two pilot actions that they did not follow what flight requirements told them to follow. And then there was a lack of training in the first officer who was actually at the controls of the Lion Air crash when the plane went down. So if you look at that digital thread, you really need to walk through the origination of the design criteria, which included the MCAS, and the MCAS was used in other places. The design criteria for the MCAS, there was in the first service action, there was a switch in the wrong spot. It seems like there was a switch in the wrong spot. In the second service action, there was a calibration that was supposed to occur that didn't actually occur. In the first pilot case, the pilot had a stick shaker event. He's supposed to return back to the departure airport when that happened, and he did not do that. He also did not record the fact to the maintenance crew when he landed. So that plane flew once with a bad system. The first pilot had problems, and he did not report those problems to the maintenance staff. And then the following day, the first officer did not show good air handling skills when he went through training. My point in all this is a digital thread could have avoided those crashes. And I'll jump a little bit. If you get to the Swiss cheese model of safety, where you put a bunch of layers of Swiss cheese together and you try to do what you can so that all the holes do not line up. A well-functioning digital thread could tell you that, wait a second, we've got a hole through all these slices of Swiss cheese, and there is these problems that could happen. There's a number of places where you could look and you say, a proper digital thread at any one of these places would have avoided that crash. And Boeing issued $20 billion in debt in order to account for the problems that they were having after the two 737 MAX crashes. So this is a $20 billion problem for Boeing that could have been solved by a digital thread. And that digital thread would probably cost $1 billion to set up, because you would have to do it for 1 million parts in an aircraft and at least the 4 or 5 tiers of supply chain that I just talked about there. However, $1 billion in expense would have saved $20 billion in cost. Go ahead. And 346 lives. I do not want to minimize that. No. Please, Jonathan, go ahead.
No, I think you're bringing up a good point about the size of a digital twin in this case, right? The scale of it, because we started some of this conversation talking about use cases and really discrete things. Power up sequence on a lunar module. Okay, but now we've moved to a much broader twin of the people involved, right? The training of the pilot that might have a problem, the reporting events, right, in operations of the product. Oh, I had a stick shaker event. I responded in this way. This was not quite right. So now I should have a data point, but I don't. But that would be another piece of the thread. So this is a much bigger thread and twin. And I think there's another piece you're highlighting here, Pat, which is, what is the digital twin that somebody should have been running, evaluating, whatever, to see, to recognize, you know what, these Swiss cheese holes do line up. There's a problem, right? Because you could have lots of pieces of data in a thread, but if you don't exercise them in the right way, and you don't have a sort of a twin that looks for something.
Right, if there's a model, right, that's saying there's a problem here.
Or, to your point earlier, Pat, a front-running simulation, something that's going to check this data in the thread. And that's where we have some issues.
Right. And I'll tell you that, so let me roll this back on to the harbor crane deal. Excuse me. I think there's a big market for, let me back up a little bit. So when I started teaching digital twins, it was just me doing finger puppets on a wall, right? Finger shadow drawings on a wall. And then in 2017, Goldman Sachs released a video on digital twins. And first, they have a marketing budget, so it's a heck of a lot better than just me, right? And second, one of the world's largest banks gets interested in digital twins. So it's no longer something that just the PLM tech guys are talking about, right? The banks are talking about this. And one of the use cases in that video is automobile insurance. So let me roll that to the harbor crane incident. So eventually presumably somebody has insured this thing, and they're going to have to pay that millions of dollars. As a matter of fact, if that particular accident had been worse, it could have been a situation similar to remember when that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal and suddenly couldn't get right. Yep. So you could have had the same. This excavator, this lift was happening in a narrow canal. So you could have had a situation where the whole canal gets shut down for however long, and somebody's got to insure that. And I think that's the customer for a front-running simulation.
Right.
When these harbor cranes, they're all independently run. One company might own 2 or 3 cranes, but there's thousands of cranes around the world. That probably all comes focus on whatever insurance company is doing maritime insurance. And if that company starts setting up twins and threads, and they start telling people, hey, we can give you less expensive insurance if you can put all your data into our twin and thread.
Right.
Then suddenly there's this financial market that encourages this. And
well, that gets scary because then who owns the data? I mean, this is, so it just opens up a whole nother box of worms, I think.
But it also opens up those opportunities, I think, Pat, that you're talking about, which is when this technology looks daunting to people, and it can, right? And that's one of the reasons why we're talking about it on the podcast, is to demystify it a little bit and make it more accessible. But even when it looks very expensive and hard to do, maybe there are other models to fund it, to support it, to incentivize it, to make you want to do the right thing, because like you mentioned in your diffusion of innovation point, it's the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Right.
And I forget who said that. It's a great quote, but there's the problem. We know we can solve these problems. We have the information and the ability, but we have to apply it to these cases.
Yeah. And there really aren't any standards anywhere in this area. So.
Right.
Okay, so I know we're running short on time, so we should wrap this up. And this has been, as we expected, Pat, a wonderful tour through use cases, right?
Yes.
Things that people can use digital twins for, should use digital twins for. And it's not all the full Monty, right? Like we talked about with some of the 737 story, right? It can be big, it can be involved in lots of data and very expensive, but it can also be small and sparse and very targeted. But I mean, I feel like that's a lot of what we covered today. Is there are tons and tons of use cases. You have to think about the value that you're going to get out of them. What's the purpose? What's the point? And then you work backwards to design a digital thread that gives you the data to help build that digital twin. I mean, am I capturing the essence of it from your perspective, Pat?
Yes. I'll kind of emphasize the thread part just a little bit. I think we need to start by designing the thread, and then to your point, go back to the twin and also our product. And if we start with a thread, we can look at lesser models like my car. I forgot to lock my car model, right? So there's these sparse twins that are still very valuable. So, but otherwise, this has been a great conversation. I love talking to you guys.
Yeah, it's been great. The only other thing I was going to add to that was that, and certainly that the importance of the digital thread and the thread and the critical nature of that data and the twin itself, which is, is its model. But I think the other piece that jumped out at me was this front-running simulation, or a way to take the thread data that's coming in that's current and then putting it through a set of steps or checks or whatever it needs to be, to make sure that twin is, meets the criteria, right? So that we can, prevent disaster or prevent, bad things from happening. So.
Yeah, I think there's a very immediate use case on that one, because there's so much cost in catastrophe that preventing catastrophe is massively worthwhile.
Indeed. Well, this has been an enlightening conversation. So thanks so much, Patrick, for your time today and joining us.
Oh, thank you much. So I love doing this.
Yes,
and always great to have you.
But I want my jacket next time.
Well, Patrick, we will always keep the door open to have you back. I know we're going to continue our series on digital twins, and I'm sure it's going to evolve. And, now you've kind of reopened the door around digital thread, which we haven't really done a series on. It might end up maybe evolving into a few couple episodes around that. So I don't know if you disagree with that, Jonathan, but...
No, I think that's a really interesting point in the connection, Pat, you made earlier. I fully support, right? You can't do twins without a thread, and you got to think about designing that thread.
Yeah.
And literally an hour ago on LinkedIn, I saw something from Razorleaf on your new digital thread product. So I didn't want to bring it up because I'm an hour into it, right? So.
All right. Well, with that, there are so many angles to take on this, and we appreciate everybody's time. If anyone has any questions for Patrick, please send us make a comment on our post, or give us a like if you like this conversation. We always welcome your questions. And with that, we're going to close out our episode. And thanks everybody for joining us, and make sure you stay sharp. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If you like this podcast, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform, or check us out on YouTube. If you have any questions, please be sure to leave us a comment on our post or send us an email at podcast@razorleaf.com. I'm sure Patrick would also love to receive your questions, so please feel free to do so. Until next time, everybody, stay sharp.